killing one or two did nothing but bring the whole nation down on your head. It was like killing a couple of Mongol soldiers when Genghis Khan was running the show. Tommy McMartin's father and uncles had done the fighting, then built up the business to what it was. They made old Arthur Thompson's gangsters look like a bunch of well-intentioned social workers. Tommy's uncle, and the man who'd led them to glory, was Benny Slab McMartin, who'd earned his handle not through a trade in the building industry, but because of an incident at the height of a gang feud. The story was that he'd used a concrete slab to flatten the nappers of two captured hard men who'd tried to take him when he was at his front door one night. Unfortunately for the two would-be assassins, Slab was harder, faster, and possessed the instincts of a sewer rat when there was a threat coming at him. He sensed them before he saw them hiding in his prized herbaceous border, and that was the last mistake they ever made. He took pictures of the finished job and sent copies to their employers, who presumed that, like their recently departed colleagues, they were probably fucked. That presumption proved on the money over the following weeks, and the carnage continued till the opposition ran out of fight, pulled up the white flag, and buried their leaders. Slab was a legend, and even though he was part of a family largely made up of part-time psychopaths, they all looked to him for leadership because he could think as well as act. Without him, the family empire would have crumbled into civil war, and their enemies would have picked them off a piece at a time. The CID and crime squads used to call him Tito, after the famous Yugoslavian marshal who managed, through sheer force of will, to keep the warring tribes in the Balkans under one flag, at least as long as he lived. The problem for Slab was that it turned out he was mortal like everyone else. Long years of hyper-stress gang feuds and a passion for treble rum and coke, with the powdered version on the side, had stressed his heart once too often. He collapsed in a heap one night as he beat the soul out of a low-level drug courier who'd lost a big consignment to the law. The poor bastard, through no fault of his own, had lost the H when he ran straight into a waiting police operation set up by his ex-girlfriend. It was the oldest story in the world. He'd been caught playing away with his fiancée's best friend, and she had her revenge. Slab told the terrified courier that there was no excuse for blabbing details of the job to the cow, and there had to be penalties for failure, especially when failure cost Slab the best part of 80 grand. "It's no the social work department, son. I mean, do I look like a fucking social worker?" Slab's team laughed, because it was in their interest to join in the fun. The courier just couldn't do humour, with 4 of his teeth already scattered on the muck-stained garage floor. Fortunately for the victim, who was already saying his final prayer, the heart attack intervened just as Slab was getting bored, wanting to head home for his evening meal and thinking it was time to finish what he'd started. It was a bad one, and Slab only survived thanks to the paramedics. In fact, his team nearly killed him before the ambulance arrived by moving him away from the scene of the beating in case the medics were offended by what was lying bleeding all over the floor. The courier, for his part, could certainly have used their expertise at the same time, but at least he was able to stagger away into the darkness and, a couple of days later, head for London to start a new life as a homeless Jakey. Slab was finished with leading from the front, and he accepted that he'd have to delegate the violent jobs to the men and family in his team because his damaged heart couldn't be present at another torture session. The emotion generated at these gatherings might just stop his ticker completely the next time. He was still the one with the brain, but all his weakened heart would allow was to give orders and direction. The McMartins were bred for aggression, committed violence with extra toppings, and never quite got the concept of diplomacy or compromise. Only Slab knew how to parley with the other main men who controlled their own part of the West Scotland market. He knew that if he snuffed it, the family would break into factions eventually, and he worried because there was no way to stop that happening. His siblings were just as damaged as he was, too knackered or too old to think of taking the top job. The man he'd been closest to when he was younger, his cousin, the elder Tommy McMartin, had already gone to meet his ancestors. Slab had another problem. Although he had a son and daughter of his own, they were 100% BAMs, and he knew that giving either of them control